I just want to be wanted, for 1 second. Those whispered words hung in the pitch-black air of the stalled elevator. Elena stood trembling in the dark, tears streaming down her face, confessing her soul to a total stranger. Minutes earlier, her ex-boyfriend had humiliated her in front of everyone, calling her wallpaper that no man would ever truly desire. She was just an invisible temp secretary, hiding from the world, and he was just a shadow in the corner. She was about to pull away in shame when a hand found her shoulder. Drawn by a magnetic force she couldn't explain, she leaned in and kissed the stranger, and for a moment, the world stopped. But then, the lights flickered back on, and the man standing in front of her wasn't a stranger. It was the one man she was terrified of. But what happened next? No one saw it coming. Not even her. If you've ever taken a risk that terrified you, hit that like button right now. Okay, let's go back to that moment. The stall, the kiss, and the flickering lights that revealed the billionaire's face. Music thumped against the walls of the grand ballroom, a rhythm that felt entirely out of sync with the shattering silence inside Elena's chest. To the rest of the world, this was the corporate event of the season, a glittering celebration of wealth, mergers, and success. But to Elena, standing frozen behind a towering display of white orchids, it was the moment her small, quiet life finally fell apart. She wasn't supposed to be here. She was just a temp, a temporary secretary hired 3 months ago to file papers and answer phones for executives who never bothered to learn her name. She was the invisible girl, the one who blended into the beige walls of the office, the one who wore sensible shoes and oversized cardigans to hide herself. But tonight she tried. For the first time in years, she had actually tried. She had worn a dress. It wasn't expensive, a simple navy slip dress she had found on sale. But she had curled her hair and put on lipstick, all to surprise Mark. Mark, who had been her boyfriend for 2 years. Mark, who always told her that her shyness was sweet and that her desire to stay in the background was what made her safe. She had come here to surprise him, to prove that she could fit into his world, that she could be more than just the quiet girl waiting at home. But the surprise, it turned out, was entirely hers. Through the gaps in the orchids she saw him. He was leaning against the marble bar, a flute of champagne in one hand, his other hand resting possessively on the waist of a woman in a shimmering red gown. The woman was everything Elena was not: loud, vibrant, undeniable. She threw her head back and laughed at something Mark whispered, a sound that cut through the ambient noise like a knife. Elena wanted to look away, to run before she heard anything else, but her feet refused to move. She was paralyzed by a cruel curiosity, a need to know exactly how little she mattered. "You're terrible," the woman in red giggled, tracing the rim of her glass. "What about your little girlfriend, the secretary?" Mark shrugged, a casual, dismissive motion that hurt more than a slap. "Elena? Elena is comfortable. She's useful. She organizes my life and never asks for anything. But come on, look at her. She's like wallpaper. You don't look at wallpaper. You just get used to it being there. She's not a woman you desire. She's a woman you settle for when you're tired of the chase." The glass in Elena's hand didn't break, but something inside her ribcage did. It was a sharp, distinct snap, the sound of her dignity fracturing. Wallpaper. Comfortable. Useful. The words echoed in her mind, louder than the jazz band, louder than the chatter of the billionaires and socialites surrounding her. She wasn't a person to him. She was a convenience, a prop. Tears welled up instantly, hot and humiliating. She couldn't let him see her. She couldn't let anyone see her. The terrifying realization that she was about to sob in the middle of a room full of the city's most powerful people spurred her into motion. She dropped her untouched drink onto a passing waiter's tray and bolted. She kept her head down, hair curtaining her face, weaving through the crowd like a ghost. She needed to leave. She needed air. She needed to vanish. She stumbled toward the bank of golden elevators at the far end of the hall. Her fingers trembled as she mashed the down button, praying for the doors to open before the first sob escaped her throat. When the bell finally dinged and the heavy doors slid apart, she rushed inside without looking, Desperate for the sanctuary of solitude, she slammed her hand against the button for the lobby, squeezing her eyes shut as the doors began to close, sealing her away from the music, the laughter, and the heartbreak. She thought she was alone. The elevator felt massive, the air cool and silent. She let out a choked, ragged breath, pressing her forehead against the cold metal of the control panel. Stupid, she whispered to herself, her voice cracking. So stupid. But she wasn't alone. From the back corner of the elevator, deep in the shadows where the recessed lighting didn't quite reach, a figure shifted. He was tall, impossibly tall, and dressed in a tuxedo that cost more than Elena made in a year. He stood with a stillness that was almost predatory, watching the woman unravel before him. Elena, blinded by her tears and consumed by her own misery, didn't see him. She didn't notice the expensive scent of sandalwood and rain that suddenly filled the small space. She didn't feel the weight of his gaze burning into her shaking shoulders. She just cried, letting the humiliation pour out of her in waves, feeling small and pathetic. The elevator descended smoothly for 3 floors, a golden cage carrying her down to the bottom. And then, with a violent shudder that knocked Elena sideways, everything stopped. The smooth hum of the machinery died. The golden lights overhead flickered once, twice, and then cut out completely. Pitch blackness swallowed them. The sudden silence was deafening. The only sound in the dark was Elena's sharp intake of breath and the sudden, electric awareness that the air in the elevator had changed. It was no longer empty. The darkness wasn't just an absence of light, it was a presence. A heavy, masculine energy radiated from the corner behind her, terrifying and strangely grounding all at once. The sadness that had been drowning her a second ago was instantly replaced by a spike of adrenaline. She froze in the dark, her heart hammering against her ribs, realizing with dawn-like horror that her moment of weakness had been witnessed by a stranger in the dark. The darkness should have been terrifying. Elena had always been afraid of the dark, afraid of what she couldn't see, and afraid of the unknown variables that she couldn't control or organize. But this darkness was different. It wasn't cold or empty. It was thick, velvety, and charged with a strange, humming energy that seemed to vibrate against her skin. The air in the small, stalled box grew heavy, not with the staleness of trapped oxygen, but with the undeniable pressure of another human presence. She stood frozen, her back pressed against the metal panel, her breath hitching in her throat. She couldn't see her hand in front of her face, but she could feel him. The stranger. He hadn't spoken a word. He hadn't moved to sound the alarm or bang on the doors. He was just there, waiting, watching her with eyes she couldn't see but could feel burning into her like a physical touch. The scent of him, sandalwood, crisp rain, and something darker, like aged leather, enveloped her, drowning out the smell of her own cheap perfume. It was a scent of power, of someone who didn't need to shout to be heard. Is someone there?" she whispered, her voice trembling in the void. Silence answered her. But then, there was a shift, the rustle of expensive fabric, the scuff of a leather shoe against the floor. He was moving closer. She should have been scared. Every instinct she possessed, every safety warning she had ever memorized, told her to shrink away. But the humiliation from the ballroom was still coursing through her veins like poison. Mark's voice echoed in her head. Wallpaper. Comfortable. Not a woman you desire. She was so tired of being safe. She was so tired of being the invisible girl who did everything right and still ended up alone while the loud, vibrant, cruel people of the world took everything they wanted. In the dark, she wasn't the temp secretary. She wasn't the girl in the discount dress. She was just a voice in the dark, a heart beating too fast, a woman unraveling. "I'm sorry," she choked out, speaking to the invisible figure. I needed to disappear. I didn't know anyone was here." Still, he didn't speak, but he was close now. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, a wall of warmth standing just inches from her shivering form. Then she felt it, a hand. It was large, warm, and calloused, finding her shoulder in the pitch blackness. It didn't grab her, it steadied her. His thumb brushed against the bare skin of her collarbone, a touch so gentle and yet so electric that it made her knees buckle. The touch broke her. "I just wanted to be seen," she confessed, the words spilling out in a rush of hysteria. "Just for 1 second, I wanted to feel like I wasn't invisible. Like I was wanted." The hand on her shoulder moved up, sliding along the column of her neck, his fingers tangling into the hair at the nape of her neck. It was a possessive gesture, dominant and reassuring all at once. He pulled her a step closer. The darkness erased the social distance, the rules, and the fear. There was only this magnetic pull, this undeniable gravity between her misery and his strength. She didn't know what came over her. Maybe it was the heartbreak. Maybe it was the darkness giving her a courage she never possessed in the light. But as she felt his breath hitch, a jagged, sharp sound that betrayed his own restraint, she reacted. She tipped her head back, blindly seeking, and pressed her lips to where she thought he might be. She found them. It wasn't a hesitant, accidental brush of skin. It was a collision. For a heartbeat, he went rigid, surprised by her audacity. But then, he shattered. A low growl vibrated in his chest, a sound of raw, starving need, and his arms wrapped around her waist, hauling her flush against his hard body. He kissed her back with a hunger that stole the air from her lungs. His mouth was hot, demanding, and tasting of scotch and danger. It was a kiss that devoured, a kiss that claimed. There was no gentleness in it, only a fierce, overwhelming intensity that made Elena's head spin. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like wallpaper. She felt like the center of the universe. She clung to his lapels, melting into him, matching his fervor, pouring all her pain into the connection. Time ceased to exist. There was only the heat of his hands, the roughness of his jaw, and the way he devoured her, as if he had been waiting a lifetime for this specific taste. And then, reality crashed back in. With a loud mechanical clunk, the elevator jerked. The hum of the ventilation system roared back to life. Elena gasped, pulling back, her lips swollen and tingling. The overhead lights flickered once, twice, and then it blazed on with blinding, unforgiving fluorescent clarity. She blinked, shielding her eyes, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. As her vision cleared, the figure in front of her came into sharp focus. The scream died in her throat. Standing before her, looking down with darkened, dilated eyes, was not just a stranger. It was a man whose face was plastered on every magazine in the lobby. It was the man whose name was whispered in fear in the break room. Sebastian Thorne, her boss, the billionaire CEO, the Ice King, who was rumored to have fired an executive for wearing the wrong color tie. He looked wrecked. His usually immaculate hair was slightly mussed from her hands. His tie was askew. His lips, usually set in a grim line of disapproval, were red and wet. He was staring at her with an expression of utter shock, his chest heaving as he tried to regulate his breathing. His hand was still half raised, as if reaching for her again. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. The horror was absolute. She hadn't just kissed a stranger. She had practically assaulted the most powerful, ruthless man in the city. The man who signed her paychecks. The man who could destroy her career with a single phone call. "You," he whispered, his voice rough, like gravel grinding on glass. Before he could say another word, the elevator arrived at the lobby. The golden doors slid open smoothly, revealing the bright, safe world of the hotel lobby. Panic, primal and overwhelming, seized her. She didn't think so. She couldn't breathe. She just ran. She bolted past him, stumbling out of the elevator and sprinting toward the exit, her heels clacking loudly against the marble floor. She didn't look back. She couldn't bear to see the anger she knew must be forming on his face. She burst out into the cool night air, flagging down the first taxi she saw, diving into the back seat as if the devil himself were chasing her. But back in the elevator, the devil wasn't chasing. Sebastian Thorne stood alone in the center of the golden box as the doors tried to close again. He didn't move. He didn't shout. He slowly raised 2 fingers to his lips, touching the spot where she had kissed him. The cold, dead look that usually haunted his eyes was gone. In its place was something burning, something confused, something alive. He looked down at the floor, where a small, cheap earring had fallen from her ear in her haste. He bent down, picking up the tiny piece of costume jewelry with trembling fingers. He stared at the empty lobby where she had vanished, his heart hammering against his ribs for the first time in years. He didn't know her name, but as the elevator doors finally sealed him in, one thought echoed in the silence. He was going to find her. Elena was starting to feel safe, but shadows from the past have a way of finding you. When she steps onto the curb that rainy Tuesday, she isn't just met by a storm. She's met by a threat that will force Sebastian to shatter his Ice King mask forever. The weekend did not exist for Elena. It was a 48-hour fever dream of anxiety, a blur of pacing her small apartment and staring at her phone, waiting for the inevitable notification that her life was over. Every time an email pinged, her heart seized in her chest, certain it was a termination notice from Human Resources. She had replayed the scene in the elevator 1,000 times, the darkness, the desperation, the way she had thrown herself at a stranger, the terrifying realization that the stranger was Sebastian Thorne. She had kissed the CEO. She had assaulted the billionaire owner of the company. In her mind, she was already blacklisted from every job in the city, her reputation in tatters, and her meager livelihood extinguished because of one moment of insanity. Monday morning arrived like an execution date. The sun was too bright, the city too loud, and the commute a nauseating ride of dread. Elena didn't walk into the Thorne Tower, she crept in. She had dressed with strategic intent, shedding the navy slip dress and the vulnerability of Friday night for her usual armor of invisibility. She wore a shapeless, oversized gray cardigan that swallowed her figure whole, a high-collared blouse buttoned to her chin, and thick-framed glasses she didn't technically need but wore to hide her eyes. She pulled her hair back into a severe, tight bun, scraping away any softness, any hint of the woman who had come alive in the dark. She wanted to be a ghost. She wanted to be a smudge on the lens of the corporate world, something so dull and uninteresting that even Sebastian Thorne wouldn't spare her a second glance. She reached her cubicle, a small, gray partition in the center of the open-plan floor, and immediately buried her face in a stack of invoices, praying for invisibility. "You look absolutely dreadful, darling." The voice was sharp, polished, and dripping with disdain. Elena flinched, looking up to see Vanessa, the senior director of personnel, looming over her desk. Vanessa was everything Elena was trying not to be: stunning, terrifyingly confident, and impeccably dressed in a tailored crimson suit that screamed authority. Vanessa was the unofficial queen of the office, a woman who had made it her personal mission to marry Sebastian Thorne, or at least become indispensable to him. She viewed every other woman in the building as either a threat or a nuisance. Elena, thankfully, had always been categorized as a nuisance. "Good morning, Vanessa," Elena whispered, keeping her eyes on her keyboard. Vanessa dropped a heavy stack of disorganized files onto Elena's desk with a loud thud, the impact sending a pen rolling onto the floor. "These need to be sorted, digitized, and filed by noon. My assistant is indisposed." And tried to sit up straight. "Elena, you look like a frightened mouse. It's bad for office morale to have someone looking so pathetic in the center of the room." Elena nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I'll get it done. See that you do." Vanessa sneered, leaning in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Mr. Thorne is in a foul mood today. Apparently, something happened at the gala on Friday. He's on the warpath. If I were you, I'd try to blend into the carpet." "Oh wait, you already do." Vanessa laughed, a cold, tinkling sound, and turned on her heel, flipping her hair. Elena felt the familiar burn of humiliation, but she welcomed it. Humiliation was safe. Humiliation meant she was still just a mouse temp. If Vanessa was bullying her, it meant Vanessa didn't know about the elevator. It meant Sebastian hadn't told anyone. Maybe, just maybe, he hadn't recognized her. Suddenly, the ambient hum of the office, the typing, the low chatter, the ringing phones, died instantly. A heavy, suffocating silence blanketed the entire floor. It was the kind of silence that only happened for one reason. The elevator doors at the end of the hall had opened. Elena's blood turned to ice. She hunched lower in her chair, typing frantically at a blank screen, refusing to look up. She could hear the footsteps. They were distinct, rhythmic, and heavy, the sound of a predator walking through its territory. Sebastian Thorne was walking through the office. Usually, he bypassed the general staff area entirely, taking his private elevator to the penthouse. But today, for some reason, he was walking the floor. He was flanked by two nervous-looking executives and his head of security, but he looked like he was walking alone. The air temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees as he passed. Elena stopped breathing. She stared at the cursor blinking on her screen, counting the seconds. Please walk past. Please walk past. Please don't see me. The footsteps drew closer. She could see the shine of his polished black shoes in her peripheral vision. They were moving with purpose. He was passing the marketing team. He was passing the accounting pod. He was approaching the admin circle. And then, the shoes stopped, right in front of her desk. The silence in the room stretched so tight it felt like it might snap. Every eye on the floor was fixed on them. Vanessa, who had been preening nearby, stepped forward with a bright, practiced smile, eager to intercept him. "Mr. Thorne," Vanessa cooed, her voice taking on a sickeningly sweet tone. "Good morning. If you're looking for the quarterly reports, I have them right here on my quiet," Sebastian said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look at her. The word was a flat, cold command that snapped Vanessa's mouth shut instantly. Her face flushed a deep, embarrassed red. Sebastian didn't look at Vanessa. He was looking down. He was looking at the top of Elena's head. Elena felt his gaze like a physical weight. It was heavy, heated, and terrifying. She couldn't hide anymore. Trembling, she slowly lifted her head. She kept her chin tucked, looking up through her thick lashes and the rim of her glasses. He looked devastated. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit that fit him like a second skin, his face set in a mask of stony indifference. But his eyes were dark and stormy and locked onto hers with a terrifying intensity. He scanned her face, taking in the messy bun, the oversized cardigan, and the lack of makeup. His jaw tightened, a small muscle ticking in his cheek. Did he know? Was he looking at the mouse's secretary, or was he looking for the woman from the dark? "You," he said. His voice was deep, resonating in her chest. Elena gripped the edge of her desk, her knuckles white. "Why, yes, sir? Coffee," he stated, his tone unreadable. "Black, no sugar. Bring it to my office immediately." The entire office seemed to gasp collectively. Sebastian Thorne never asked for coffee from the general staff. He had a private executive assistant for that. He had a machine in his office that cost more than a car. Vanessa stepped in again, desperate to regain control. "Sir, surely you don't mean her? I can have my assistant, or I can personally." Sebastian slowly turned his head to look at Vanessa. The look he gave her was so cold it could have frozen hell over. "Did I stutter, Vanessa?" "No, sir," she squeaked, shrinking back. Sebastian turned his gaze back to Elena. For a split second, something flickered in his eyes, not anger, but something searching, something dangerous. 5 minutes. Don't be late." He turned and walked away, his entourage scrambling to keep up. Elena sat frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. This wasn't a coffee run. This was a summons. He knew. He had to know. He was calling her into his lair to fire her privately, to interrogate her, or worse. "Well?" Vanessa hissed, leaning over the partition, her face twisted with jealousy and confusion. "What are you waiting for? Go! And if you spill a single drop on his carpet, you're finished." Elena stood up on shaky legs. She felt like a prisoner walking toward the gallows. She moved toward the break room to brew the coffee, her mind racing. Why coffee? Why her? Why now? As she walked toward the massive double doors of the CEO's office 5 minutes later, a ceramic cup rattling in her trembling hands, she realized the terror of Monday morning wasn't about being fired. It was about being seen. The lights were on now, and there was nowhere left to hide. She reached for the handle of his office door, took a deep breath, and prepared to step into the lion's den. The doors to Sebastian Thorne's office were heavy, made of solid mahogany that seemed to absorb sound rather than reflect it. Elena had to use both hands to push one open, balancing the steaming cup of coffee precariously as she slipped inside. If the hallway was intimidating, the office was a fortress. It was vast, a cavernous expanse of minimalist luxury wrapped in floor-to-ceiling glass that offered a panoramic view of the city skyline. But Elena didn't look at the view. She looked at him. Sebastian was seated behind a desk that looked more like a slab of black obsidian than furniture. He was typing on a laptop, his focus absolute, his brow furrowed in concentration. He didn't look up when she entered. He didn't acknowledge the click of the door closing behind her. He simply continued to work, the rhythmic clack-clack-clack of his typing the only sound in the enormous room. Elena stood by the door, frozen. The silence was heavier than the darkness in the elevator had been. It was a weaponized silence, designed to make her feel small, to make her question her right to exist in his space. She took a hesitant step forward, her heels sinking into the plush gray carpet. "Sir?" she whispered, her voice barely carrying across the room. "Your coffee." He didn't stop typing. He didn't blink. He let her stand there for a full minute, holding the cup until her arms began to ache. It was a power play, she knew, but it felt personal. He was testing her patience, or perhaps her fear. Finally, just as she was considering setting the cup on a side table and bolting, he stopped. The typing ceased abruptly. He slowly closed the laptop and leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers under his chin. He turned his gaze upon her. It was the same look from the elevator, intense, dissecting, uncomfortably intimate, but now it was sharpened by the harsh daylight flooding the room. He watched her walk toward the desk, his eyes tracking every nervous twitch, every tremor in her hands. "Put it down," he commanded softly. Elena approached the desk, her heart thumping against her ribs. She placed the cup on a leather coaster near his right hand, careful not to let the china clink. She smelled him again, that intoxicating blend of sandalwood and rain, and a flush of heat crawled up her neck, a visceral memory of his mouth on hers. She stepped back quickly, putting distance between them, clutching her hands in front of her oversized cardigan. "Is there anything else, Mr. Thorne?" she asked, staring at the knot of his tie. "Sit," he said. Elena blinked. "Sir?" "Sit down, Elena." He knew her name. He hadn't asked. He hadn't looked at a file. He just said it, rolling the vowels on his tongue as if he had tasted them before. She sank into one of the low, modern chairs opposite his desk. She felt like a child called to the principal's office or a mouse trapped in a glass jar. Sebastian picked up the coffee, took a slow sip, and watched her over the rim of the cup. "You've been with Thorne Enterprises for 3 months, he stated, not asking. "Temporary contract, assigned to general administration. Your performance reviews are adequate, efficient, invisible." He set the cup down. "Why do you dress like that?" The question was so unexpected, so personal, that Elena jerked her head up. "Excuse me? The clothes?" He gestured vaguely at her shapeless gray cardigan and the high-collared blouse. "They don't fit you. They're 3 sizes too big. You walk around my office like you're apologizing for taking up space." "Why?" Elena's face burned. She pulled the cardigan tighter around herself. I like to be comfortable, sir. I'm here to work, not to be seen," he finished for her. His voice dropped an octave, smooth and dangerous. "Is that it? You think if you cover yourself in gray wool, no one will notice you? No one will look at you?" He stood up then, moving around the desk with a fluid grace that made her breath hitch. He leaned against the front of his desk, crossing his arms, looming over her seated form. He was too close now. "I noticed details, Elena," he said quietly. "I noticed that you're the first one here in the morning and the last one to leave. I noticed that you fixed the filing errors the other secretaries make without taking credit. And I notice..." He paused, his eyes drifting down to her hands, which were twisting nervously in her lap. He reached out, his hand hovering for a second before he lightly tapped the back of her hand with one finger. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through her that nearly made her jump out of the chair. "I noticed that you're trembling," he murmured. "Are you afraid of me?" "No," she lied quickly. "I mean, you're the CEO, sir. It's intimidating, is it? He tilted his head, studying her face. Or are you afraid of something else? Perhaps you're afraid I'll ask you where you were on Friday night. The air left the room. Elena stopped breathing. This was it. The trap had sprung. He knew. He was toying with her, dragging out the moment of execution. Her voice failed her. She looked at him, her eyes wide with panic. I was at the company party, sir. Were you? He raised an eyebrow. I didn't see you. I walked through the room 3 times. I saw red dresses, gold dresses. I saw people desperate for my attention. But I didn't see you. He leaned in closer, his face inches from hers. She could see the flecks of gold in his dark irises. But then again, you like to hide, don't you? In big clothes, in corners, in the dark. The emphasis on the dark was unmistakable. It hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. He was challenging her. He was daring her to confess, to say, it was me. I'm the one who kissed you. But Elena couldn't do it. Shame and fear welded her mouth shut. If she admitted it, she made it real. If she admitted it, she would become the woman who assaulted her boss. She stared at him, her lips trembling, pleading silently for him to stop. Sebastian watched her struggle. He saw the fear in her eyes, but he also saw the memory of the kiss. He saw her pupils dilate as she looked at his mouth. He knew. He absolutely knew. But he didn't want to force it out of her. He wanted her to give it to him. He sighed, pushing himself off the desk and walking back to his chair. The tension broke, leaving Elena dizzy. Your work in administration is wasted, he said abruptly, his tone shifting back to cold professionalism. You have an eye for detail. I need that here. Elena blinked, trying to catch up. Here, sir? My executive assistant quit this morning, he lied smoothly. I need someone to manage my schedule. Someone quiet. Someone who doesn't seek attention. Someone who knows how to keep secrets. He sat down and opened his laptop again, dismissing her with his posture. Report to Vanessa. Tell her you're transferred to my desk effective immediately. Your salary will be tripled. Elena stood up, her legs shaking so badly she almost fell. Tripled? Sir, I'm not qualified for. I decide who is qualified, Elena. He cut her off without looking up. Go. She turned and walked toward the door, her mind reeling. He wasn't firing her. He was promoting her. He was keeping her close. Why? Was it punishment? Was it a game? She reached for the door handle, desperate to escape the suffocating intensity of the room. Elena! His voice stopped her one last time. She froze, looking back over her shoulder. Sebastian had stopped typing again. He was looking at her, his expression unreadable, his eyes dark and piercing. I prefer honesty over silence, Miss Faintheart, he said softly. Remember that. Elena fled. She closed the heavy door behind her and leaned against it, gasping for air as if she had just surfaced from deep water. Her heart was racing so fast it hurt. He knew. He definitely knew. And now, she belonged to him. Inside the office, Sebastian Thorne stared at the closed door. He slowly raised his hand to his lips, tracing the shape of them, a ghost of a smile touching the corner of his mouth. He wasn't usually a man who played games. He was a man who acquired assets. But this was different. She was terrified of him, yet she had kissed him with a fire that burned through his soul. He would keep her close. He would peel back the layers of gray wool and fear. He would find the woman from the elevator again. And this time, he wouldn't let her run. Vanessa's office was a shrine to her own ego, filled with framed photos of herself at galas and an overwhelming scent of gardenias that made the air thick and cloying. Elena sat on the edge of the uncomfortable guest chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap, while Vanessa paced behind her desk like a caged tiger. The personnel director was furious. Her perfectly manicured nails clicked rhythmically against the glass surface of her desk, a sound that echoed the ticking of the clock on the wall. I simply do not understand it, Vanessa hissed, stopping to glare at Elena. He fired incredible, qualified assistants, women with master's degrees, women with style. And he asks for you? She said the word you, as if it were a slur. She tossed a thick contract across the desk. It slid over the polished surface and stopped just inches from Elena's hand. "He claims he needs someone unobtrusive," Vanessa spat, making air quotes with her fingers. "I suppose that is the one thing you excel at, being a non-entity." Elena reached for the contract, her fingers trembling slightly. "I'll do my best, Vanessa. Don't get comfortable," Vanessa warned, leaning over the desk, her eyes narrowing into slits. "Let me be very clear with you, Elena. Sebastian Thorne is not a man. He is a machine. He is ruthless, exacting, and cold. He breaks things he doesn't like, and he hates mistakes. His last assistant left in tears because she bought the wrong brand of sparkling water. You won't last a week, and when you crash and burn, I will be right here to sweep up the ashes." Elena swallowed hard, nodding. "I understand. Good. Now get out of my sight. Your desk is on the top floor. Don't embarrass this department." The move to the top floor felt less like a promotion and more like being exiled to a beautiful, lonely planet. The executive floor was silent, hermetically sealed from the chaos of the lower levels. The carpets were thicker, the lights softer, and the air cooler. Elena's new desk was a sleek, glass station situated directly outside Sebastian's double doors. She was the gatekeeper to the dragon's lair. The first week was a blur of terror and exhaustion. Vanessa hadn't lied about the workload. Sebastian Thorne worked with a demonic intensity. He arrived at 6 in the morning and often didn't leave until 10 at night. He expected files to be ready before he asked for them. He expected calls to be screened with diplomatic ruthlessness. He demanded perfection. But as the days turned into nights, and Elena sat silently at her post, she began to see something else. She saw the man behind the myth. She saw him rub his temples when he thought no one was looking, a gesture of profound exhaustion. She saw the way he stared out the window at the city lights, looking not like a conqueror but like a prisoner in a glass tower. He barely ate. He barely slept. He carried the weight of a multi-billion-dollar empire on his shoulders, and he carried it alone. Everyone who entered his office wanted something: money, approval, or power. No one ever asked him how he was. No one ever offered him anything without strings attached. Except Elena. She became his shadow. Because she was used to being invisible, she knew how to move without disturbing the air. She started anticipating his needs. When she heard him massaging his forehead, she silently placed a glass of water and 2 aspirin on the corner of his desk, then vanished before he could say thank you. When he was stuck on a conference call that ran through lunch, she didn't interrupt him to ask what he wanted. She simply slid a plate of cut fruit and a protein sandwich next to his laptop, knowing he wouldn't eat a heavy meal while working. She never spoke unless spoken to. She never tried to make conversation. She offered him the one thing he didn't have: peace. One Tuesday afternoon, the contrast between Elena and the rest of the world became violently clear. Sebastian was in the middle of a crisis. A merger in Tokyo was falling apart, and he was on 2 phones at once, his voice tight with controlled fury. The atmosphere in the office was volatile. Suddenly, the elevator chimed. Vanessa stepped out, carrying a stack of unnecessary papers, dressed in a dress that was far too tight, and wearing perfume that announced her arrival 5 seconds before she appeared. "Sebastian!" she announced loudly, breezing past Elena's desk and pushing open the double doors without knocking. "I just had to show you these projected figures for the gala seating chart. I think you'll find." Sebastian slammed the receiver down on the landline. He looked up, his eyes blazing with a terrifying rage. "Get out." Vanessa froze, her smile faltering. "But I thought, I am in the middle of saving a $4 billion deal," he snarled, his voice low and deadly. "And you interrupted me with a seating chart? Get out of my office, Vanessa. And if you ever walk in here without an appointment again, you won't just be fired, you'll be blacklisted." Vanessa turned pale, stammering an apology before turning and fleeing, her heels clacking frantically on the hardwood. The silence that followed was heavy. Sebastian ran a hand down his face, letting out a long, ragged sigh. He looked ready to snap. Elena stood up from her desk. She didn't go in. She didn't speak. She simply walked to the small kitchenette, brewed a fresh pot of the jasmine tea she had noticed he drank when he was stressed, and placed it on a tray. She walked into the office, the carpet muffling her steps. She didn't look at him. She placed the tray on the side table near the window, away from his cluttered desk. She adjusted the blinds slightly to block the glare that was hitting his computer screen, a small annoyance he hadn't had time to fix. Then she turned to leave. "Elena," he said. His voice was tired, stripped of the anger he had just unleashed on Vanessa. She stopped, turning back. "Yes, sir?" He was leaning back in his chair, watching her. His tie was loosened, and his sleeves were rolled up to his elbows. He wasn't looking at her like an employee. He was looking at her with a strange, intense curiosity, as if she were a puzzle he was trying to solve. "You changed the blinds," he observed quietly. "The glare was hitting your eyes, sir," she whispered. He looked at the blinds, then back at her. "Vanessa has worked here for 5 years. She never noticed the glare." "Vanessa has a lot on her mind," Elena said diplomatically. "And you?" he asked, his gaze dropping to her hands, which were clasped in front of her gray cardigan. "What is on your mind, Elena?" "Just your schedule, sir," she lied, her heart skipping a beat. He stared at her for a long moment, the silence stretching between them. It wasn't the hostile silence of the interrogation. It was something softer, intimate. He was looking for the girl in the elevator. He was looking for the spark. "Thank you," he said finally. "For the tea." "You're welcome." She walked out, closing the door softly. Inside the office, Sebastian didn't go back to work immediately. He spun his chair around to face the window, reaching for the tea she had brought. He took a sip, the warmth spreading through his chest. He closed his eyes, inhaling the steam. It smelled like peace. He opened his eyes and looked at the closed door. He knew she was terrified of him. He knew she was hiding inside those terrible clothes. But every day, she did something that proved she saw him. Not the billionaire. Not the CEO. Him. He wasn't just keeping her around for a job. He was keeping her around because, for the first time in 10 years, he didn't want to be alone. He wanted to know what would happen if he could get her to stop shaking. He wanted to know what would happen if he turned the lights off again. He watched the door, and for the first time, the predator decided to be patient. He would wait. He would watch. And when she was ready, he would strike. Elena was starting to feel safe, but shadows from the past have a way of finding you. When she steps onto the curb that rainy Tuesday, she isn't just met by a storm. She's met by a threat that will force Sebastian to shatter his Ice King mask forever. The rain had started falling just as Elena clocked out, a dismal drizzle that matched the sudden drop in her mood. It had been a long week. The tension between her and Sebastian was growing tighter with every passing day, a silent, vibrating cord that stretched from his office to her desk. He watched her constantly now. Sometimes she would look up from her computer to find him standing in the doorway of his office, just staring, his expression unreadable. It made her skin prickle and her heart race, but she kept her head down, kept her work perfect, and kept her secrets locked away. She buttoned her oversized trench coat and stepped out of the revolving doors of Thorne Tower, intending to hurry to the subway station. But she didn't make it past the curb. "Elena!" The voice stopped her dead in her tracks. It was a voice she had once loved, a voice that now made her stomach turn. Mark stood near the valet stand, looking disheveled and frantic. His hair was wet from the rain, his expensive suit rumpled. He looked like a man who had realized he had thrown away a winning lottery ticket. Elena clutched her bag tighter to her chest. "Mark, what are you doing here?" He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, ignoring the passers-by. "I've been texting you for days. You blocked me?" "Yes," Elena said, her voice shaking but firm. "We're done, Mark. I saw you. With her. There's nothing to talk about." "Oh, come on, Elle," he scoffed, reaching out to grab her hand. She recoiled, but he was faster, his fingers clamping around her wrist. "Don't be dramatic. It was a party. We were drunk. You know how those things go. I miss you. My apartment is a mess. I can't find anything. I need you to come back." The audacity stole the breath from her lungs. He didn't miss her. He missed his maid. He missed the comfort. Let go of me, she said, trying to pull her arm back. I'm not coming back. I'm not your wallpaper anymore. Mark's face darkened. His grip tightened, bruising her skin. Stop this nonsense. You're making a scene. You're coming with me, and we're going to talk about this like adults. He yanked her toward him, hard. Elena stumbled, a cry of pain escaping her lips. I said let go, and she said let go. The voice didn't come from Mark. It came from behind him. It was a voice that was low, smooth, and colder than the bottom of the ocean. It cut through the noise of the rain and the traffic like a blade. Mark froze. He turned slowly, still holding Elena's wrist. Sebastian Thorne had just stepped out of a sleek black town car that had pulled up to the curb. He wasn't wearing a coat. The rain fell on his immaculate suit and on his dark hair, but he didn't seem to notice. He stood perfectly still, his hands in his pockets, staring at Mark with a look of utter, terrifying boredom. But his eyes were lethal. Who the hell are you? Mark sneered, though his voice wavered slightly. Sebastian didn't answer the question. He didn't even look at Mark's face. He looked pointedly at Mark's hand, which was still gripping Elena's wrist. You have exactly 3 seconds to remove your hand from my employee, Sebastian said softly. 1, Mark scoffed, trying to puff out his chest. Employee? Look, buddy, this is a private domestic dispute. She's my girlfriend. I can. 2, Sebastian continued, taking a slow step forward. The air around him seemed to crackle with menace. The valet drivers had stopped moving. The doorman was watching with wide eyes. Sebastian Thorne was not a man who got involved in street brawls. He was a man who ended them before they began. Mark looked at Sebastian, then at the massive building behind him, and the realization dawned. The blood drained from his face. You're Thorne. 3, Sebastian whispered. He moved. It was a blur of motion, too fast to track. One moment he was standing 3 feet away, the next he was right in Mark's space. He didn't punch him. He simply reached out and gripped Mark's wrist, the one holding Elena, and squeezed. Mark yelped, his fingers instantly springing open as Sebastian applied a pressure point hold that looked agonizing. Elena stumbled back, free, rubbing her wrist. Sebastian didn't let go of Mark. He leaned in close, his voice a dangerous murmur that only the 3 of them could hear. If you ever touch her again, if you ever even say her name, I will buy the company you work for, fire you, and ensure you never work in this city again. I will bury you in litigation so deep you won't see sunlight for a decade. Do you understand? Mark nodded frantically, tears of pain pricking his eyes. Yes, I understand. Sebastian released him with a shove of disgust. Run! Mark didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled backward, slipping on the wet pavement, before turning and sprinting down the block, disappearing into the rainy night. Sebastian watched him go for a moment, his chest heaving slightly, his jaw clenched tight. Then, the monster vanished, and he turned to Elena. The change was instant. The cold rage melted into something frantic and concerned. He stepped toward her, ignoring the rain soaking his shirt. Elena, he breathed, reaching for her. Did he hurt you? He took her hands in his, so gently, as if she were made of spun glass. He lifted her wrist, inspecting the red marks Mark's fingers had left on her pale skin. His face twisted in anger again, a flash of something possessive and primal. He bruised you, he growled, his thumb tracing the mark tenderly. I should have broken his arm. I'm okay, Elena whispered, looking up at him. She was trembling, but not from the cold. She was trembling because Sebastian Thorne, the Ice King, was standing in the rain, ruining a $5,000 suit just to check if she was hurt. You're shaking, he murmured. He let go of her wrist and immediately shrugged off his suit jacket. He draped it over her shoulders, the heavy, warm fabric enveloping her in his scent, sandalwood, rain, and safety. He pulled the lapels together, his knuckles grazing her chin. They were standing inches apart now. The rain created a curtain around them, isolating them from the world. Sebastian looked down at her, his eyes searching her face, his gaze dropping to her lips. The air between them grew thick and heavy, charged with the same electricity that had been in the elevator. His hands lingered on the lapels of the jacket, his fingers brushing her neck. He leaned in, his eyelids fluttering shut. He was going to kiss her, here, on the street, in the rain. He was going to claim her. Elena's heart hammered a frantic rhythm. She didn't pull away. She tilted her head up, waiting, wanting. But then, a car horn honked nearby. The spell shattered. Sebastian froze. His eyes snapped open, and clarity returned. He looked at where they were, on the public sidewalk, in front of his building. He looked at who she was, his employee, his assistant. He pulled back sharply, dropping his hands. He took a step away, clearing his throat, his mask of professionalism slamming back into place, though it was slightly crooked now. "My driver will take you home," he said, his voice rough. "Don't argue. Get in the car." "But your jacket." She started to remove it. "Keep it," he commanded, turning away so she wouldn't see the hunger still burning in his eyes. "I don't want you catching a cold. You have work tomorrow." He opened the back door of the town car for her, waiting until she slid inside. He didn't get in with her. He slammed the door shut and signaled the driver to go. As the car pulled away, Elena looked back through the rain-streaked window. Sebastian was standing alone on the curb, his white shirt clinging to his shoulders, watching the car disappear into the traffic. He looked lonely. He looked dangerous. But most of all, he looked like a man who was fighting a war against himself, and losing. For the first time, Elena didn't feel afraid of the beast. She felt safe. And that was the most terrifying feeling of all. The annual Thorne Foundation Charity Gala was not just a party. It was the crown jewel of the social calendar. It was a night of astronomical wealth, political maneuvering, and glittering excess, hosted by Sebastian himself. For Elena, it was supposed to be her first official function as Sebastian's executive assistant. She had spent the entire week organizing guest lists, confirming caterers, and ensuring that every detail of Sebastian's schedule was flawless. She wanted to prove to him, and to herself, that she belonged here. That she wasn't just a charity case or a mouse he had taken pity on. On the morning of the gala, Vanessa breezed by Elena's desk, dropping a heavy envelope onto the glass surface. Her smile was tight, her eyes gleaming with a predatory light that Elena, in her busyness, failed to notice. "The finalized itinerary for tonight," Vanessa chirped. "Oh, and Sebastian asked me to pass on a message about the dress code. He wants the staff to be understated, business casual. He said specifically that he doesn't want his assistant looking like she's trying to compete with the donors. Wear something simple. A blouse and slacks. You know, blend in." Elena frowned slightly. "Business casual? For a black tie gala? He's the boss." Vanessa shrugged innocently. "He wants to focus on charity, not help. Don't overthink it, sweetie. Just do your job." Elena nodded slowly. It seemed strange, but Sebastian was unconventional. He hated ostentatious displays. Maybe he wanted her ready to work, to run errands, not to sip champagne. She trusted him. And foolishly, she trusted the chain of command. That evening, Elena arrived at the venue, a sprawling, historic opera house draped in velvet and gold. She wore her best work trousers, a crisp white silk blouse, and sensible black flats. She had pulled her hair into a neat, professional ponytail. She felt efficient. She felt ready. She walked up the grand staircase, clutching her clipboard, ready to check in the VIPs. But as she reached the top of the stairs and stepped into the ballroom, the air left her lungs. It was a sea of floor-length gowns, shimmering diamonds, and tuxedos. The women looked like queens, draped in silk and satin. The men were in tails. It wasn't just formal. It was hyper-formal. Even the waitstaff were wearing white gloves and bow ties. Elena stood frozen in the doorway, a blot of stark, office-casual white and black against a backdrop of jewel-toned opulence. She looked like a caterer who had gotten lost. Or worse, she looked like someone who didn't know the rules. Heads turned. The whispering started almost immediately. "Who is that? Is she delivering something? Look at her shoes. Is she serious?" Elena felt the heat rise up her neck, a familiar, suffocating wave of shame. She clutched the clipboard to her chest like a shield, wishing the floor would open up and swallow her whole. She scanned the room frantically, looking for a shadow to hide in, but the ballroom was brightly lit by massive crystal chandeliers. There was nowhere to hide. Then she saw them. Sebastian stood near the center of the room, looking devastating in a midnight blue velvet tuxedo. He was speaking with a senator, looking bored and imperious. And standing right next to him, wearing a backless crimson gown that clung to every curve, was Vanessa. Vanessa looked up and saw Elena. A slow, cruel smile spread across her face. She leaned in and whispered something to Sebastian. Sebastian turned. His eyes found Elena instantly. His expression didn't change, but his body went still. He looked at her trousers. He looked at her blouse. He looked at the clipboard. For a moment, Elena prayed he would see the trap. She prayed he would understand. But from this distance, he just looked cold. He looked like the CEO staring at an employee who had failed a simple instruction. Vanessa laughed, a sound that carried across the room. She glided over to a group of socialites, gesturing toward Elena. The women giggled, covering their mouths with gloved hands. "The poor thing," one of them said loudly enough for Elena to hear. "She really thought she could play dress-up. It's tragic, really." The humiliation was visceral. It was Section 1 all over again, but worse. Because this time, she had allowed herself to hope. She had allowed herself to believe she was climbing out of the pit. But she wasn't. She was just the wallpaper, trying to be art. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and stinging. She couldn't do this. She couldn't stand here and be their punchline. She turned and ran. She pushed past the confused waiter and bolted toward the heavy velvet curtains that led to the balcony. She stumbled out into the cool night air, gasping for breath, her hands shaking so badly she dropped the clipboard. It clattered onto the stone floor, the sound echoing in the silence. She moved to the stone railing, gripping it until her knuckles turned white. Below her, the city lights twinkled indifferently. "Stupid," she sobbed, wiping furiously at her eyes. "You are so stupid, Elena. You thought he cared? You thought you mattered? You're just a temp. You're just a stranger in the dark." He probably laughed with them. The shame was a physical weight, crushing her chest. She couldn't go back in there. She couldn't face him. She couldn't face Vanessa's smirk. She took a deep, ragged breath. It was over. The promotion, the fantasy, the unspoken thing between her and Sebastian. It was all a lie she had told herself to survive the loneliness. "I quit," she whispered to the wind. She turned to leave, intending to find the service exit and disappear from his life forever. She would mail her resignation letter. She would change her number. She would go back to being invisible, where it was safe. She stood on the balcony, ready to quit, ready to vanish. But she didn't know that behind the velvet curtains, Sebastian was watching. He wasn't there to fire her. He was there to do the one thing that would silence the entire room. But as she turned, the heavy velvet curtains swept open. Light from the ballroom spilled onto the dark balcony, illuminating a tall, broad-shouldered silhouette blocking her path. Elena froze. Sebastian stepped out onto the balcony. The noise of the party faded as the curtains swung shut behind him, leaving them alone in the semi-darkness. He didn't look angry. He didn't look disappointed. He looked intense. He was holding a glass of champagne in one hand, but his eyes were locked on her tear-streaked face. "You're leaving," he stated, his voice low. "I don't belong here." Elena choked out, trying to maintain her dignity. I made a mistake with the dress code. Vanessa told me." "I know what Vanessa told you," he interrupted softly. He set the glass down on a stone ledge and took a step toward her. "And I know why she did it." Elena stepped back, pressing herself against the railing. "It doesn't matter. Please, just let me go. I resign. You don't have to fire me." "Fire you?" Sebastian let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Elena, look at me." "No," she whispered, looking at her shoes. "I can't. I'm embarrassed. I look ridiculous." "You look," he said, taking another step closer, "like the only real thing in that entire room." Elena's head snapped up. Sebastian was standing right in front of her now. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a fraction of a second before cupping her cheek. His thumb brushed away a tear that was tracking down her face. "Do you really think," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. That I care about a dress? Do you think I brought you here to decorate the room? Then why am I here? She cried, her voice breaking. I'm just a secretary. I'm just a nobody. You are not a nobody to me, he growled. Suddenly, the lights from the city seemed to dim as he leaned in, his intensity consuming her. You are the woman who brought me back to life in a dark elevator, and I am tired of pretending I don't know who you are. He grabbed her hand, the one clutching the railing, and pulled her away from the edge. Come with me, he commanded. Where? Back inside. I can't, she panicked. Everyone is staring. Let them stare, Sebastian said, his eyes flashing with a fierce, protective light. Let them see exactly who you are to me. He didn't give her a chance to argue. He laced his fingers through hers, a grip of steel, and pulled her toward the curtains. He was going to drag her back into the light, and this time, he wasn't going to let go. Sebastian, please, Elena begged, digging her heels into the plush carpet as they moved through the corridor leading back to the ballroom. I can't go back in there. Look at me. I'm wearing office slacks. Everyone is laughing. Vanessa is laughing. Just let me leave, please. She tried to pull her hand from his grip, but he held on tight, not painfully, but with an unyielding permanence that told her escape was impossible. He stopped just before the grand archway that opened into the main hall, turning to face her. His expression was a storm of conflicting emotions, frustration, tenderness, and a burning resolve. Why does their laughter matter to you? He asked, his voice low and urgent. Because they're right, Elena cried, the dam finally breaking. I'm not one of you. I don't belong in this world of velvet and champagne. I'm just a mistake. I'm a stranger you met in the dark who got confused and thought she could be Cinderella for a week. But the lights are on now, Sebastian. The magic is gone. I'm just the temp secretary who embarrassed herself. She looked down at their joined hands, her voice dropping to a whisper. You need to let me go. Pretend the elevator never happened. Pretend you never met me. Sebastian went very still. The sounds of the string quartet drifted from the ballroom, delicate and polite, a stark contrast to the raw desperation in the hallway. Pretend I never met you? He repeated slowly. Do you have any idea what my life was like before that elevator stalled? He stepped closer, forcing her to look up at him. It was gray. It was silent. It was a schedule of meetings and acquisitions and people who only wanted pieces of me. I was a ghost haunting my own life, Elena. I was dead. He brought her hand up to his chest, pressing her palm against the silk of his shirt, right over his heart. She could feel it beating, heavy, steady, and fast. And then the lights went out, he murmured. And in the dark, I felt something. A touch. A voice that wasn't asking for money or power but just to be seen. You kissed me, and for the first time in 10 years, I felt air in my lungs. Elena's breath hitched. She stared at him, wide-eyed. You know? The whole time? Of course I knew, he confessed, a wry, self-deprecating smile touching his lips. I knew the moment you walked into my office that Monday morning. You tried to hide in that terrible gray cardigan. You wouldn't look at me. But I smelled you. Sandalwood and rain, my scent on your skin. And I saw your hands. I remembered exactly how they felt in my hair. Then why? She whispered. Why didn't you say anything? Why did you make me bring you coffee? Why did you make me your assistant? Because I needed to know if the woman in the dark was real, he said softly. I needed to know if you were just another operator trying to trap a billionaire or if you were you. And every day you proved it, with your tea, with your quiet competence, with the way you looked at me when you thought I wasn't watching. I kept you close because I couldn't bear to let you go back to being invisible. He reached out and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. You are not a mistake, Elena. You are the only thing in my life that makes sense. Tears spilled over her lashes, but this time, they weren't tears of shame. They were tears of relief. A validation so profound it shook her to her core. He saw her. He really saw her. No, he said, his voice hardening with authority. We are going to go back in there. Not because I care about the gala, but because I will not let anyone, especially Vanessa, make you feel like you are less than them. You are standing next to me, and where I stand, you stand." He released her hand only to shrug off his velvet tuxedo jacket. With a deliberate, ceremonial slowness, he draped it over her shoulders. The jacket was heavy, warm, and smelled of him. It swallowed her small frame, the sleeves hanging long past her hands, but the symbolism was unmistakable. He was cloaking her in his power. He was marking her. "Ready?" he asked. Elena took a deep breath, pulling the jacket tighter around herself. She looked at him, this powerful, terrifying, beautiful man, and nodded. "Ready." They walked through the archway together. The effect was instantaneous. As soon as Sebastian Thorne entered the room, the atmosphere shifted. But when people saw who was beside him, the mousy secretary in the business slacks, now wearing the CEO's jacket like a royal mantle, the room went silent. The music seemed to fade into the background. Vanessa was holding court near the center fountain, a glass of champagne in her hand, still smirking as she recounted the story of Elena's outfit to a group of board members. "And then she just ran off," Vanessa laughed. "Honestly, the girl has no sense of—" She stopped. Her glass froze halfway to her mouth. Her eyes bulged as she saw Sebastian leading Elena directly toward her. Sebastian didn't stop until he was standing 3 feet from Vanessa. The circle of socialites parted like the Red Sea, sensing the danger radiating from him. "Vanessa," Sebastian said. His voice wasn't loud, but in the hush of the room, it sounded like a thunderclap. "Sebastian," she stammered, her gaze darting to Elena and the jacket. I see you found her. I was just telling the board how interesting her choice of attire is." "It is interesting," Sebastian agreed coldly. "It's interesting because my executive assistant was given the wrong dress code instructions by you." A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Vanessa turned pale. It must have been a miscommunication. I would never save it." Sebastian cut her off. "I tolerate many things, Vanessa. Ambition, greed, even incompetence. But I do not tolerate cruelty, and I do not tolerate sabotage." He looked around the circle of board members and VIPs, making eye contact with each of them. "Elena is not just my assistant. She is the reason this office has functioned flawlessly for the past month. She is intelligent, she is capable, and she possesses a dignity that most people in this room could not buy with all their millions." He turned back to Vanessa. "You are relieved of your duties, effective immediately. Security will escort you out." Vanessa's mouth opened and closed like a fish. She looked around for support, but no one moved. In Sebastian's world, his word was law. She let out a choked sound of indignation, turned on her heel, and marched away, her crimson dress trailing behind her like a badge of defeat. Sebastian didn't watch her go. He turned his attention solely to Elena. He reached out and took her hand again, right there in the middle of the ballroom, under the gaze of 500 people. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice soft again, meant only for her. Elena looked at him, her heart swelling until she thought it might burst. The whispers had started again, but the tone had changed. It wasn't mockery anymore. It was awesome. It was envy. It was the realization that the plain girl in the oversized jacket was the most important person in the room because she held the heart of the king. "I'm okay," she whispered, a genuine smile breaking through her fear. "I'm better than okay." "Good," Sebastian said. He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles in a gesture of old-world reverence that made several women in the crowd sigh audibly. "Then let's get out of here. I believe we have unfinished business." "Business?" she asked, confused. "We never finished that conversation," he murmured, his eyes darkening with intent. "About what happens when the lights go out." He led her through the crowd, not toward the exit, but toward the private elevator that led to the penthouse. And as the golden doors closed on them, shutting out the staring eyes of the world, Elena realized that the darkness wasn't something to fear anymore. It was just the beginning. The silence of the penthouse was profound. After the cacophony of the gala, the string quartets, the laughter, the whispers, the quiet here felt sacred. The private elevator opened directly into the living space, A sprawling expanse of modern architecture that felt less like a home and more like a museum. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying view of the city below, a sea of lights that looked like scattered diamonds on black velvet. But inside, the lights were dim, cast by sleek, recessed fixtures that bathed the room in a warm, amber glow. Sebastian walked in first, loosening his tie with a sharp tug and tossing it onto a leather armchair. He looked agitated, pacing toward the window before turning back to face her. Elena stood near the elevator, still wrapped in his oversized tuxedo jacket, feeling small but strangely anchored. "I'm sorry," he said abruptly, running a hand through his hair. "I shouldn't have done that. The scene downstairs, the public spectacle. I lost control. You defended me," Elena said softly, stepping onto the plush rug. "No one has ever done that for me before. They shouldn't have had to," he muttered, his jaw tightening. "You shouldn't have been in that position. I should have protected you from Vanessa sooner. I should have," he trailed off, looking at her with a raw intensity that made her knees weak. "I'm not good at this, Elena. I'm good at mergers. I'm good at hostile takeovers. I'm not good at people." "You were good in the elevator," she reminded him. "You were kind." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "Kind? I was selfish. I was starving." He walked over to a crystal decanter and poured 2 fingers of amber liquid, but he didn't drink it. He just held the glass, staring into the depths of the scotch. "Do you know how lonely it is at the top of that tower? Everyone wants something. My name, my money, my influence. They look at me, and they see a checkbook. They don't see a man." He turned to look at her, his eyes vulnerable in a way she had never seen. "That night in the elevator, you didn't know who I was. You were crying because you were hurt, and when you reached out to me, it wasn't because I was Sebastian Thorne. It was because I was just a body in the dark, a stranger. You wanted me." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "That kiss, it terrified me, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't in control. I wasn't the CEO. I was just a man who wanted a woman so badly it hurt." Elena felt her heart twisting in her chest. She moved toward him, shedding the fear that had defined her for so long. "Is that why you didn't fire me? Because you wanted to feel that again?" "I didn't fire you because I wanted to see if we could exist in the light," he corrected her. "I wanted to know if you could look at me, the real me, the tired, angry, complicated man, and not run away. I waited, Elena. I waited for you to stop shaking. I waited for you to smile. I didn't want to use my power to force you into anything. I wanted you to choose." He set the glass down and stood before her, his hands hanging at his sides, open and empty. "So I'm giving you an out. Right now. You can walk back to that elevator. You can go home. You can keep your job, or I can give you a severance package that will set you up for life. You never have to see me again." He took a breath, his gaze locking onto hers. "Or you can stay." The offer hung in the air between them. It was the ultimate contrast to the elevator. There was no darkness to hide in, no anonymity, no secrets. He was offering her total freedom. Elena looked at him. She saw the lines of exhaustion around his eyes. She saw the tension in his shoulders. She saw the boy who was lonely inside the billionaire suit. She realized that he needed her just as much as she had needed him in that dark box. She slowly shrugged the heavy tuxedo jacket off her shoulders, letting it slide to the floor in a heap of velvet. She stood before him in her simple white blouse and black trousers, unadorned, unhidden, and real. "I don't want a severance package," she said quietly. "No?" he asked, his voice strained. "No." She took a step forward, closing the distance. She reached out and placed her hands on his chest, feeling the heat of his skin through his shirt. "I don't want to run anymore. I spent my whole life trying to be invisible, Sebastian. But with you, I don't want to hide." She looked up at him, her eyes shining with certainty. "I choose you." Sebastian let out a ragged breath, as if he had been holding it for weeks. His restraint shattered. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her flush against him, lifting her slightly off the ground. "Thank God," he groaned. He lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't like the first kiss. It wasn't desperate or frantic or fueled by panic. It was deliberate. It was slow. It was a worshipful exploration of her mouth, a claim that went deeper than skin. He kissed her with the lights on, his eyes opened for a moment to watch her face, to ensure this was real. He kissed her with tenderness, with passion, and with a promise that resonated in the silence of the penthouse. Elena melted into him, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. There were no shadows to obscure them now. Just two people who had found each other in the dark, finally stepping into the light together. 3 months had passed since the night of the gala, and the city skyline looked different to Elena now. It didn't look like a fortress built to keep her out. It looked like a landscape she was helping to shape. She sat in her new office, not a cubicle, but a real office with a door and a window, reviewing the final proposal for the Thorne Foundation's new literacy initiative. She wasn't Sebastian's assistant anymore. That had been the first condition of their relationship. Sebastian had insisted upon it the morning after the gala, over a breakfast of burnt toast that he had attempted to make himself. "I can't be your boss and your lover," he had said, looking comically serious while scraping charred crumbs off the bread. "It's unethical. And besides, you're too smart to just manage my calendar. You should be managing projects." So, with his support, but entirely on her own merit, she had applied for the vacancy in the philanthropy department. She had interviewed, presented a strategy, and won the role. She was finishing her degree at night, her tuition paid for not by a billionaire boyfriend but by the employee scholarship program she had legitimately qualified for. She had reclaimed her independence, but she had lost her invisibility. And she didn't miss it one bit. Her phone buzzed on the desk. A text from an unknown number. "Just wanted you to know I'm leaving the city. Got a job in Ohio. I'm sorry. For everything." Mark. Elena stared at the screen for a moment. 3 months ago, a text from Mark would have sent her into a spiral of anxiety and heartache. Now, she felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a vague sense of relief that he was moving on. She didn't reply. She simply deleted the message and blocked the number. That part of her life, the part where she settled for crumbs of affection, was a closed chapter. A knock on her doorframe drew her attention. "Knock, knock," a cheerful voice called out. It was Sarah, the new personnel director. "Just dropping off the revised org charts." "Oh, and did you hear? Vanessa finally quit." Elena looked up, raising an eyebrow. "She quit?" "Yep," Sarah laughed, leaning against the door. "After Sebastian transferred her to the archive division in the basement. Literally, the basement. No windows, just fluorescent lights and dust mites. She lasted about 8 weeks. Apparently, the lack of an audience for her drama was too much to bear. Good riddance, I say. The air quality in the building has already improved." Elena smiled. "I wish her luck," and she meant it. She was too happy to hold grudges. Vanessa was just a ghost from a time when Elena was afraid of her own shadow. Anyway, Sarah checked her watch. "Meeting in the boardroom at 5. The big boss is leading this one." She winked. Everyone knew about Elena and Sebastian, though they kept it professional within the office walls. It was the worst kept secret in the company, but instead of malicious gossip, it was treated with a sort of reverent curiosity. The staff had seen the change in Sebastian. The Ice King had thawed. He actually said, "Good morning," now. He took weekends off. He smiled. And everyone knew exactly who was responsible for the miracle. Elena grabbed her tablet and headed for the elevators. The hallway was busy with the midday rush. She pressed the button, and a moment later the doors slid open. It was crowded. Executives, interns, and managers were packed shoulder to shoulder. Elena squeezed into the back corner, murmuring apologies. The doors were about to close when a hand stopped them. Sebastian stepped in. The conversation in the elevator died instantly. Even though he was thawed, he was still Sebastian Thorne. His presence demanded silence. He was dressed in a sharp navy suit, looking every inch the titan of industry. He scanned the crowded box, nodding briefly to his CFO, before his eyes landed on Elena in the back corner. His expression remained perfectly neutral, professional, detached. "Good afternoon," he addressed the group generally. "Good afternoon, Mr. Thorne," the chorus replied. He turned and stood directly in front of Elena, facing the doors like everyone else. To the rest of the car, they were just two colleagues standing near each other in a crowded space. There was a respectful distance between their bodies, but as the elevator began its smooth descent, Elena felt a hand brush against hers behind his back. His fingers sought hers, warm and strong. He laced his fingers through hers, squeezing gently. It was a secret, silent communication, a tether in the crowd. Elena's heart skipped a beat, just like it had the first time. She squeezed back, biting her lip to suppress a smile. She looked at the reflection in the polished metal doors. She saw the executives checking their watches. She saw the interns staring at their phones. And she saw them. The tall, powerful man and the woman standing tall beside him. She thought about that first night. The tears, the darkness, the feeling of shattering into a million pieces. She had thought it was the end of her life. She had thought the darkness was a monster that would swallow her whole. But looking at Sebastian's reflection, catching the tiny, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips as he held her hand in secret, she realized the truth. The darkness hadn't been a monster. It had been a cocoon. It was the place where the old Elena, the wallpaper, the victim, the mouse, had finally died, making room for the woman who could stand in the fire and not burn. The elevator chimed as it reached the top floor. Sebastian released her hand just as the doors opened. He stepped out first, buttoning his jacket, the epitome of command. He turned back to the group, his eyes finding hers for one brief, electric second. "Shall we?" he asked. Elena stepped out of the elevator and into the sunlit hallway. She wasn't afraid of the light anymore. She wasn't afraid of the dark. She walked beside him, head held high, ready to conquer the world. She was no longer the stranger in the dark. She was the light. If this story touched your heart, if it made you believe that you deserve to be seen, even in the dark, share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Like this video so more people can find it. And subscribe if you want more stories that feel like this. I'll see you in the next one. Take care of your heart.